Hey guys, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and today I've invited a Muslim academic on the show to discuss the Gaza-Israel conflict. And the reason why I've invited Dr. Zain Ali on the show today is because as I've been watching like the news, I've been watching YouTube, there's not a whole lot of, or at least like in the people that I follow, which I follow quite a bit in like the apologetics world, I'm not really seeing too many Muslim academics coming on talking about Hamas and sort of denouncing Hamas and saying how bad it is. And, you know, and this isn't to say that there's not like bad things going on all over the place. War is horrible. But what I wanted to do is invite Dr. Zain on. Do you mind if I could just call you Zain? Should I just call you Zain?
That's fine. Yes, absolutely, Cameron.
Okay. Yeah. And part of the reason why I wanted to invite Zain on is he's reached out to me in the past, and he's got some really interesting academic work as a Muslim academic or analytic philosopher. And there are people that I know that are in the academic world, and they speak very highly of you. I don't know if you know that, Zain, but you come
It's good to hear,
highly
Cameron.
recommended from other philosophers in the community. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. It should be a little bit on the short side. I've only got a few questions lined up for you, and we can kind of get your perspective on this from as a Muslim academic. But let me just give a quick bio for those of you. This is your first time meeting Zain. He is an academic based at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. He teaches within the Theology and Religion program. His research interests are in the area of Islamic studies and philosophy of religion. He is also involved with providing pastoral care in a hospice setting. So I also wanted to give you, since this is your first time on the show, I wanted to give you just a quick opportunity at the beginning of the show to fill in any of the details, explain sort of a little bit more about your background, and then also kind of tie it into today's topic. You know, how involved are you in this whole, involved in the sense of, the research that you've done. What, just tie us your background into the current conflict over there in Israel.
Cameron, it's really great to be on your show today. And, my kids were kind of excited. I said, hey, man, I'm going to be on this famous YouTuber's show. And they were like, oh, what's his name? Let's look him up, right?
Don't
So,
tell a kid that you're on a YouTuber show or anything like that. They're gonna flip out.
so anyway, my kids were excited about it, right? And Cameron, as you said, my interests are in Islamic studies. I teach a paper on Islam at the University of Auckland. And my training is essentially in the philosophy of religion with a focus on Islam. And, during my undergrad years and postgrad years, I've benefited a lot from Christian philosophers. And I think it's fair to say philosophy of religion wouldn't be where it is today if it not were for the work of an amazing group of Christian thinkers. My work in itself, is about promoting what I call a reflective Muslim perspective. And essentially, what that is, I'm a Muslim. I'm interested in these deep, big questions. Is there a God? Was Muhammad a prophet of God? Is the Quran a word of the word of God, and so on? But I also recognize that those who belong to other religious traditions, Christians, Jews, or even atheists as well, are as interested and as sincere about seeking truth as I am. And sort of that's the perspective I bring with my work and my research. Sort of a charitable approach to those I'm engaging with. In terms of my interest in Israel and Palestine, growing up as a Muslim, and I remember, you go to the mosque on Friday as a kid, go along with my dad. And even as a kid, I remember, you know, every now and then there'd be prayers for Palestine, prayers for Jerusalem. And as a kid, it intrigued me, but it wasn't until, I became a little bit older that I began to realize um, why this was so important and sort of the global significance of these issues. It was quite strange that I'm here in New Zealand, half a world away, and here we are praying for Palestinians, right, as a kid. Um, and so, it kind of gets you thinking about, what is it that's going on here?
Hmm.
And the mosque is a kind of place where you rub shoulders with people from all kinds of backgrounds and from all over the world, really. And this included people, praying next to people from Palestine. And I would have conversations with them and conversations with those who had spent time in the Holy Land. And especially with my Palestinian friends, and I had a Palestinian neighbor as well at a certain point, there was this palpable sense of loss, of pain, a longing for home, a longing for a homeland. And Cameron, I don't know if this is perhaps reflective of how the Christian community works as well, but among Muslims, there's this idea of an ummah, a community, right? It's almost like we're family. And so you brought up with this concept that it's not only you and your immediate family, but you belong to this larger family of faith. And so you grow up with prayers for Palestine, and you have Palestinian friends, and then you sense this palpable sadness. And so that was sort of my initial awakening to this issue, and empathy for my Palestinian friends and what they were going through. And just before COVID kicked off, a couple of years ago, um, I had the wonderful opportunity to visit Israel and the Palestinian territories as well. It was part of a study group, and it included a whole, some academics, some journalists, some folks who are Jewish, some folks who are Christians. And it was about a 2-week tour in the Holy Land, and we got to meet a number of people. And this was eye-opening for me, really, to be there on the ground, to go beyond what you see on TV or what you read in the papers, and to meet real people and have those everyday conversations. And so I found that um, uh, eye-opening. It expanded my horizons and gave me a deeper perspective on the things that are happening on the ground between Israel and Palestine. So it's sort of a long story, but it's an ongoing interest, really.
Hmm. Well, why don't we dive into some of the questions that I've got prepared for you today on the topic of Hamas and Islam. And I mean, as I've been thinking through this issue, and I've been thinking about Islam for the past couple of years, I suppose, I haven't done the amount of study that I would like to do, at least as of yet. There are a couple books, a couple audiobooks that I've listened through, and but one of the things, there's an association that happens. I was going to ask this question last, but I'll go ahead and ask it at the beginning here. There's an association that is currently happening and has happened between terrorism groups like Hamas and Islam. So regardless, like whether or not you think that, you regard Hamas as like this fringe sect of Islam that, sort of fundamentalist version that shouldn't really be taken too seriously, whatever. There's nevertheless an association that happens in the minds of Westerners, everyone who's sort of looking on at this and is horrified. And it's like, how could this group do this sort of thing? And so you look at that and you say, well, this is obviously tied in some way to Islam. Like there's an association between this group of people and then what they're doing, and they're justifying it through the Quran and the Hadiths and other. The question basically that I've got for you is, groups like Hamas serve to further associate Islam with terrorism. And so, but how can Muslims combat this association? And how can they seek to distance themselves from these sort of terror groups like Hamas that are doing these horrible, horrible things? And there's all sorts of questions that are, embedded in there as well, psychologically, like what's going on in the minds of these people that make this association. And especially like for someone, as a Christian, like I'm interested in evangelism, and I'm sure that you as a Muslim, you're interested in evangelism. And so there's all sorts of evangelistic questions that are tied up in that as well, with the question of association. But I know that's really big question, but just give me some of your thoughts.
Cameron, I'm gonna let's start with the evangelism issue, right?
Okay.
There was a point in my, in I guess there was a point in time where I was strong on evangelism, sort of Muslim evangelism, right, Dawah, and it's something that I've stepped back from, and it's sort of I leave it in the hands of God, right? God guides, and really, I'm here to do my best to seek the truth, have honest conversations with people, and really, the path that God chooses for people is really in God's hands. Um, Now, about the association between Islam and terrorism, I remember. Well, I'm going to take you back to 9/11, right? So we're going like 20 years ago, maybe just over 20 years ago. 9/11 happens, and I remember seeing it on the news on TV. I head into campus, I'm studying at the time in undergrad, and I meet a friend of mine who's from Afghanistan, and the guy is shattered. He's emotionally broken, right? And he comes up to me and he goes, "What have the Muslims done?" So, it's not only those outside of Islam who look at it and go, "What are the Muslims doing?" Right? They're Muslims themselves. Like we think the same thing. We look at it, and I myself think the same thing as well. I'm looking at this event unfold, uh, the indiscriminate targeting of women and children and civilians, and it's done in the name of Islam, and it's done by Muslims, and it's heartbreaking. And even as I'm speaking to you, like I feel an emotion within me, and I feel like crying sometimes, right? And so here's my Afghan friend. They're not known for being scared or getting upset too easily, right? Paragons of bravery, these Afghan friends of mine, yet here he was broken. How could the Muslims have done this? And so I think the first, um, perhaps the first steps in in thinking about Islam and terrorism is that Muslims are also affected by this. It's not like, oh, this has happened and they represent Islam and Muslims just go along with whatever's been happening, right? You think about Muslims, whether it's your neighbor, your colleague. I'm thinking of myself, right? I got kids, got a job. The worry on my mind is, are my kids going to get a good education? They're going to get good jobs, things like that, right? Everyday concerns. And I think that's the best way to approach this. Um, Not to think of Muslims as one group, one monolithic group, to think of them as individuals. The guy who lives next door, maybe he's your Uber driver, right? And to have that openness towards people. And, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was that association between Islam and terrorism, and it was understandable, right? Given the scale of the event. Now, as a Muslim, as an academic, um, I kind of looked at the various responses about how Muslims were responding to 9/11, and the majority response was was one of condemnation, that this act of terror, the targeting of innocent civilians, women, children, the evil nature of this event really could not be said to represent Islam. That was the majority view. I don't know if folks outside of the Muslim community were particularly receptive to that view, but that is the view. and it remains the view. I mean, here in New Zealand, right, we're halfway across the world, and the question regularly comes up, what is the Muslim community's stance on terrorism? And the local Muslim association, they say, no, look, we don't condone terror at all. We don't condone um, violence towards innocent folk, women, children, old people. And this includes recent events in Israel as well. It's deeply, deeply disturbing. On the one hand, I have a deep empathy for the Palestinian people. And I remember on our trip to Israel, we met with an editor of an Israeli newspaper. And he was talking about Palestinians and Israelis. And he goes, you know what? I think there are two indigenous peoples in this land, the Palestinians and the Jews. And I kind of sat back for a moment and I go, man, that's a real insight. And wouldn't that be a great place to start from? Recognizing two peoples who are indigenous to the land and who can both call the place home. Now, what happens afterwards, I'm not too sure, right? But Cameron, it is an ongoing issue how folks think about Islam. And, I don't know if you're a fan of MMA. You've got, Khabib, right? Who's sort of an MMA champion. And he said something interesting, right? He goes, look, folks are not going to go out there, read the Quran and the Hadith. They're not going to judge Islam on those, by going to those books. They're going to judge Islam on how you are, on what you are, right? And I think that's so true that folks judge Islam on the basis of the Muslims they know, they encounter. And I think for most folks, I don't know if they have a network of Muslim friends, but I think a lot of what they see about Islam will be initially through the media, and they will judge it based on what they see. And I think there's a lot of different issues here, and it's not easy to resolve.
So my next question for you, I was thinking about trying to ad-lib it, but I actually want to read it exactly as I have it here in the document that I sent you, because it's very important to get the wording correct. So let me just read it here. So in your opinion, this is number 4 that I sent you. What strategies or initiatives can Muslim communities globally undertake to combat terrorism and support peaceful solutions in the region? The questions that I'm asking you, like I've heard. I've been watching the news. I've been watching guys like Ben Shapiro talk about this. Ben is a Jew, and so man, if I've heard any rhetoric on any side, it's from Ben. But that aside, it's just everyone that I've heard talk about this is like there's no clear solution. So like to sit here and ask you like how should Muslim communities like combat terrorism and do away with this? It's almost like asking you a question that there is no even real answer to. But nevertheless, give it a shot. Let me know what you think.
I mean, you know what? Sometimes I think folks ask the question slightly naively, and that's not what you're doing, right? And it's almost like, hey, Zayn, don't you have the 0900 number for Hamas, right? Can't you just give them a call and kind of sort out their theology? And really, I really wish I did, right? 0900 ISIS, hey guys, look, you've got this wrong.
Yeah.
And
should we consider this alternate interpretation to the scriptures?
Yes, that's right. Let's try a more charitable interpretation of things. I think you ask a really nice question, though. Like what can Muslim communities do globally? And it's a really challenging question. All right, so in the aftermath of 9/11, right, I'm going to draw your attention to a document called A Common Word. A Common Word Between You and Us. I think that's the title of the document. And this document is endorsed by, I think at the moment, 300 to 500 Muslim scholars from around the world. And what initially happened was a group of Muslim scholars came together, thinkers, and they said, look, we've had this tragedy happen. What is it that is Islam, what are our core values? You know, what is it that Islam represents? And there are two core values, and I think you'll recognize what they are. It doesn't come as a surprise. The first one is the love of God, and the second one is the love of the neighbor. To love God and to love your neighbor. Those were identified as the two fundamental principles of Islam. And the document went on to say something like, it's part of love of the neighbor to respect freedom of religion. And so it wasn't, it hasn't received a lot of media attention, but I think this document is so, so, so important theologically and philosophically. It really shows that Muslim thinkers and scholars from around the world endorse a view of Islam that is committed to something as fundamental as love. Um, as part of the Abrahamic family, as Jews and Christians and Muslims, we acknowledge that yes, the God of Abraham is real, but even more important is that the God of Abraham is inviting us to respond in love to Him, but also to each other. So I think, you talk about strategies about how to foster change, how to foster a sort of a better space for us to be in. And I think this particular document goes a long way. Now, I think there are other things that need to happen. And prior to the recent events in Israel, in fact, a couple of days prior, I was reading about the warming relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that as sort of a really positive thing, right? Saudi Arabia, Israel, once that relationship is, warms up and it's seen to develop, I think that sends a signal out to the rest of the Muslim world as well. And there are other countries in the Middle East who are also sort of having growing ties with Israel. Um, so I think it's the theologians and the philosophers have their work to do. The political leaders have their work to do as well, sort of a top down approach. But there are other things as well. You act local, think global, or something like that, right? Or think global, act local. And here in New Zealand, even though we're sort of halfway across the world from the Middle East, um, I myself have been part of a Jewish Muslim student dialogue um, um, event that happens once a year. And we've been doing this for, well, I think it's about 4 or 5 years, bringing together Muslim and Jewish students from from the university environment, sitting together, having a meal, talking about our values. So I think it happens in a number of different ways, locally in that small, intimate setting, just the meeting of students. Uh, so the top-down level, the politicians, the political leaders in the Muslim world, but also the theologians and the philosophers. So I think we all have a role to play. Um, and the danger with, or one of the dangers with events of the past few weeks is that it kind of eclipses things. It's almost like none of this matters now. It's only about Hamas. It's only about their terror. That's the only thing that's getting the oxygen right now. And everything else kind of recedes into the background. So, Cameron, it's a challenge. There's a lot of good things happening, a lot of potential for good. But how do you compete with the terror of Hamas, man? It's like, in the media, you sometimes hear the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. Me having dinner, me and a group of Muslim Jewish students having dinner, we don't make the headlines, right? We're never going to make the
Yeah.
headlines. Um, but those kind of events are so meaningful. and it really stays with me. Like having really honest conversations with Jewish friends.
Well, I'd like to give you a chance to share your thoughts on Hamas and terrorism in general. I don't know if I did that at the beginning. I think we talked about the association at the very beginning of the show. But yeah, what are your thoughts from the perspective of a Muslim academic on terrorism as a Muslim and these sort of fundamentalist Islamic groups like Hamas? What are your thoughts? Or
Cameron, so
like
let me
maybe here's another way of putting it as well. Like if you could share a message with them, what would you say to them?
I'll have to think long and have hard about the message, right? But um, on this visit to Israel, I visited a town called Siderot, which has been one of the locations where the Hamas militants entered and I think killed people. And Siderot is very close to Gaza. And we sort of walked up this little hill, and in the distance you could see the wall and you could see Gaza, right? Um, and so Gaza's in my mind, but so is Siderot. And I think so. The question, was what do I think of Hamas? And to be honest, I don't think much of them. It's heartbreaking what they've done. They've, I stand with the Palestinians, and I still do wholeheartedly. But the way that they've tried to um, um, represent their cause, I think, does an injustice to the cause itself. They've carried out an act of evil, and it's wrong. That will be my message to them, that what you've done is wrong. No matter how much oppression you live under, to indiscriminately kill is wrong. There's just no justification for it. And my heart breaks. It breaks for the the families of those victims. And my heart breaks for the Palestinians now in Gaza who have to live through the retaliation. It's like there is nothing good that has come from this, right? It's just you've added to the suffering, and there's just more suffering now.
Yeah, and this is also not to say you're not like saying or giving a sort of endorsement on the retaliation, the level of retaliation that Israel has displayed. I take it you're not saying that this is the exact correct course of action to take against Hamas. I think the entire world is kind of like, what do we do with this? What is the correct response to this? And then you see what Israel is doing, and then people are still. I mean, maybe I'm just sort of projecting on others what I myself am sort of feeling, but I see it and I'm like, I just don't know. Like, what would I do in that situation? I don't know. I wanted to give you an opportunity to make that clarification, because I can see some people thinking that you're endorsing everything that's going on over there on both sides, which I don't think is. I think most
No,
people are going. I think most people are going to have some issue on both sides.
yeah, I think the indiscriminate killing of civilians. I don't think that's right. That's just wrong. That's I don't like from our from the Abrahamic perspective,
Mm-hmm.
um, theological perspective, philosophical perspective. It's just wrong.
Well,
Whether
what
it's
this actually
whoever's doing it, right? Whoever's responsible for a series of events that leads to the killing of innocent civilians, you got to take a step back and think about what you're doing.
this actually makes me think about another show we did back when I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. Oppenheimer came out, and we were talking about the morality of dropping atom bombs and how that works out morally and stuff. And it makes me think about the means that you use in order to combat some other group that has harmed you. It's just like I mean, I think I was listening to another Ben Shapiro video. I think that it was like the very first video that he made, and he was giving an analogy of like if someone comes and killed your child in your house and then ran away to someone else's house and was hiding behind another child, like holding a gun to their heads. The cops that went over there to try to de-escalate the situation or take care of it and get the guy arrested and try him and everything. You wouldn't just because he's got like holding a gun to someone's head, you wouldn't just like back off and like forget about it, right? You'd have to take some sort of action. And if something were to happen in your attempt of detaining him, if something were to happen, if he were to kill the person that he was holding hostage, that wouldn't be on the cop's fault. It would be the the person who initially killed the family member of yours. And so there's just anyways. I guess the overall point is that these issues are so complicated, and it's hard to know what the correct course of action is. In fact, the Christians that I had on to talk about the whole like atom bomb issue were saying that basically it's not it wasn't justified to drop those bombs. Like you've got to use other means. And so I guess the reason why I wanted to mention that is to point people if this issue sort of interests you, there's other videos and other topics that you guys can go and check out. But is there anything else that you would like to mention on that topic before I bring up my next question?
Cameron, I think you're right. It is a difficult issue to think about, and Hamas is taking up all the oxygen right now. But every now and then you'll see a gentleman in the news from the Palestinian Mission, right? Sort of the PLO, and I think his name is Hussam Zomlot. And he's saying, look, at the PLO, we've renounced violence. We've done so for the last 30 years. And we want to have a dialogue and we want peace. We want the two-state solution, right? And he's not getting as much airtime as these other guys. So I think there are partners in peace. And it's time to give them their moment. Time to give them a chance.
So we've only got a few more minutes, but maybe two more questions if time allows. So the first question is, how do you view the relationship between Hamas and the broader Muslim community and their stance on terrorism? So and also in particular, what I'm thinking is like the surrounding nations, like Iran, has, from what I understand, they've been like supplying them with Hamas. They've been supplying Hamas with funds and weapons. Maybe that's incorrect, but there are other Muslim, majority countries that are, I guess, on board with what their project is. So yeah, what are your thoughts on the relationship between Hamas and these other communities?
Yeah, it's again another good question, right? Hamas and the broader Muslim community, the broader Muslim world, the countries in the Middle East. So I think in sort of the everyday context, right? Think about the everyday Muslim. I don't think Hamas has much sway at all for the everyday Muslim. In terms of the broader context, I think what Hamas is trying to do at the moment is they know that the everyday Muslim, most Muslims have a deep empathy for the Palestinian people and their struggle. And what they're trying to do is to tap into it by saying that we are the ones who can best lead the struggle. And what from the little bit of media that I've seen, right, the leaders of Hamas are essentially saying, we are defending Al-Aqsa, we are defending Jerusalem, we are defending the Holy Land, right? And so that's sort of the angle that they're pushing right now. They are trying to tap in to the broader Muslim community by saying that we can do this the best, we can represent the Palestinian people and the Muslim interests the best, right? Whether anyone's listening, I don't know. What you say about Iran is true, I think, that there is a link there. Iran does support Hamas, and I think that's the same with Syria as well, perhaps, and the same with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And that's the danger of this conflict, right? That sure, things are
Mm-hmm.
unfolding in the Gaza Strip. What happens to the north? What are Hezbollah doing? Are they
Mm-hmm.
going to pull the trigger as well? What's Syria going to do? Are they going to start things up? And of course, Iran. What's Iran going to do, right? So I think there is great potential for instability, further instability. And like I was saying earlier on, right? Like a week ago, just a couple of days before this, I was thinking, man, the Middle East is looking okay, right? Saudi's talking to Israel, Saudi's talking to Iran, Iran releasing some American prisoners, right? And I was going, hey, things are looking optimistic, things are looking up, and then this happens, and you go, my goodness, have things just fallen apart once again?
Mm.
And so, in a sense, on one level, Hamas has no sway with the average everyday Muslim. But then, like in New Zealand, right? Little old New Zealand, half a world away. Um, there was a story in the news today about the synagogue and a couple of Jewish schools here, which are closed. This is because Hamas has asked for a day of jihad. And so there is a palpable sense of fear within the Jewish community right here in New Zealand, right half a world away. So in that sense, Hamas does have some sway. It does sort of have this ability to spread fear and perhaps terror. Um, but in another sense, um, I'm also optimistic that countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, especially Egypt, and Egypt has a long history of brokering sort of peace agreements. But I'm quite optimistic that the countries in the Middle East, um, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi, perhaps even Iran, they're gonna try and calm things down. And I know Egypt is trying to push, or a couple of countries in the Middle East, and I think even the U.S. is trying to push for uh, humanitarian assistance, at least for the Palestinians in Gaza, sort of a humanitarian corridor where innocent folk can be safe. Um, in terms of their stance on terrorism, like you say, Hamas has, I think, it's committed to the destruction of Israel and so on. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something that I endorse. So you have an interesting situation where majority of Muslims are very much sympathetic to the Palestinians, but also horrified by um, the violence that's unfolding at the moment.
So I have we have a little bit more time. We could either go to another question that I've got prepared, or we could answer a question. It looks like we've got several different commenters from all over the world right now in our live chat. One of them looks to be from Israel, maybe even a Jew. Would you be open to taking one of their questions?
Cameron, I'll do my best.
Okay. Yeah, this one, I mean, tensions are high, as everyone that's watching this knows. But we'll just get this out. I want to get your feedback on this one question. We'll get this one question in, and then we'll close out the show for today. In this one, I don't know how to pronounce the name. It looks like it's in Hebrew. But he says Islam represents violence. Those scholars who don't go by the book are not the same as terrorists who use Quran 2:191 to rape and kill my family. We already tried to present the two-state solution. So obviously a whole lot going on here, but yeah, feel free to share any thoughts you've got on this comment.
Cameron, I think emotions are so high at the moment, are so high. Um, I'm not sure how you cut through that, right? That emotions are at the point where you stop seeing the other as a person, as a human being. And I think about one of my favorite philosophers, Emmanuel Levinas, a Jewish philosopher, student of Martin Heidegger, right? Um, lived through World War II, the Holocaust, and all that. Um, and he talks about the face-to-face interaction. I hold up a cup. It's made of ceramic. It's white, holds water, and that's about it, right? It's an object. But he goes, you can't do that with a person. You can't reduce them. You can't objectify them. And the risk with what's happened in the last few days and what's sort of been happening for a while is that we objectify each other. He's my enemy. They are my enemy. They want to kill me. They are not human beings. And I think that is so dangerous to get to that point where you lose sight of the humanity of others, of your neighbors, to the point where you think it's okay to kill. And that's the tragedy of this, right? We're part of the Abrahamic family, and God calls us to love. It's an unconditional call, an absolute call to love God with all your heart and your mind, and to love your neighbor. And we've somehow drifted so far from it. It's a tragedy.
Well, the specific comment, he says these scholars who don't go by the book. I assume. Do you reject the Quran as a Muslim, or I mean, what is that? What do you think he means by that? Do you think that he's insinuating that you reject the Quran, the Hadith?
It's hard for me to to get a proper read on the question, Cameron. Who are the scholars? What that particular verse refers to. Usually as an academic, I'd go open up my Quran, look at the commentaries, think about who these scholars are. Um, but Islam represents violence. That first statement I can understand. Um, and the majority of Muslims are not violent. You know, after this interview, I'm heading out for brunch. My father-in-law turns 80. That's my plans for today, right? Um, I'm not planning any violence. In New Zealand, it's also election, right? Election day. So we're electing a new government. And the majority of Muslims have those everyday concerns. And my goodness, how is it that we've come to see our brothers in faith as enemies? How have we come to that point? I think perhaps it's a betrayal of the tradition that we're part of.
Well, Zayn, thank you so much for coming on the show. As I mentioned at the very beginning, I wanted to give an opportunity for your voice in particular to be heard on a platform like this. So some of you might be wondering why is a channel that's focused on Christian apologetics even covering an issue in Israel that is distinctly between Palestinians and in Israelis, Jewish Israelis. The fact is that Jesus was a Jew, and that's, I think, reason enough to be interested in what's going on over there. Especially as you, I've been to Israel, and it's a beautiful place, and there's just so much to love about it, and it's so sad and heartbreaking, as you put it, to see what's going on over there. But again, I appreciate you coming on.
Cameron, it's wonderful to be on your show, and may God bless you, your family, and your work. And like you say, Israel, especially Jerusalem, it's beautiful, right? Like ethnically, I'm Indian. I've got I've got no Semitic connection at all, right? But in Jerusalem, I felt at home.
Hmm.
It's the strangest feeling ever. At the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, at the Western Wall, at the Temple Mount. It felt beautiful and it felt like home. I don't know why, but yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
That's a beautiful note to end on. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next Capturing Christianity video very soon. See you guys later. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out. Third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christian